And now, marine weather around Alaska. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and here is your Alaska marine weather outlook as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. It is Monday, April 28th, 2024, and we start out this Monday afternoon looking at the sea ice. The ice is still in place here around the central portion of the Bering Sea and to Kuskokwim Bay, north of St. Paul, but surrounding St. Matthew. The ice has been rather stubborn to melt off, but we are starting to see areas opening up along the shoreline around Nunavik Island, along the Yukon coastline, and up into areas of Norton Sound and around St. Lawrence Island. And again, this trend will just gradually continue as we head into May. Overall, the weather pattern has been rather quiet here for the past several days, especially through the weekend, and it's held on at least another day today, but things are going to become a little more active as the week unfolds, especially by the time we get into later this week and into the upcoming weekend. We're going to see some systems coming in across the Aleutians, Lower Bering, as well as North Pacific up into the Western Gulf, and then that's going to spread moisture all the way over and back into the Panhandle and up into the central, eastern, and interior during the latter half of this weekend. But before then, still pretty quiet. We have 1 week low south of the Alaska Peninsula. Another one that's just later tonight will be over toward Vancouver Island. So pretty quiet weather throughout most of the mainland and then across the Panhandle and the Alaska Peninsula. There's a little stronger low out toward the western Aleutians. That feature is going to work its way eastward on Tuesday with a little secondary low forming here around the central Aleutians. And then we're also going to have this cold front dropping south-southeastward across the Arctic coast Tuesday afternoon. That's going to bring some colder temperatures, reinforce some of the colder air here along the north slope and Arctic coast, as well as shift winds back around to the northeast. And then on Wednesday, that front just kind of stalls, washes out, and just be stationary boundary between colder air to the north and then relatively milder temperatures south. With the daytime heating, not just Tuesday afternoon, but Wednesday, we could see some pop-up variety showers that could include rain or a mix of rain, snow, and even some ice pellets. Also, some stronger winds will take shape here along the west side of the Brooks Range as that colder air comes in behind on brisk northeast winds. And then here comes that secondary low toward Bristol Bay. There'll be some rain showers or areas of rain associated with that front, with yet another low way out just west, southwest of the Aleutians. This is going to be the system that really comes in for the weekend to bring more of a change across the southwest part of the state, Alaska Peninsula, into the western Gulf. So that's days away. But this next one will spread some areas of light rain and rain showers, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, around Kodiak Island, Lower Cook Inlet by midweek. So looking at the marine forecast on Tuesday, kind of a mixed bag of 10-knot winds for the inner channels. South winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves there, Lynn Canal. North winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves, Stevens Passage. And then south winds again 10 knots around Dixon Entrance, waves at foot or two. For the outer coast, generally an onshore flow at about 10 knots, swells just 4 or 5 feet. On Wednesday, still kind of a mixed bag of winds around 10 knots for the inner channels with waves a foot or two. A little bit more of an offshore flow around 10 knots. Along the coastal areas of the Gulf within 15 nautical miles of shoreline, and we're looking at swells 3-4 feet. On Tuesday, winds will be east to southeast from Prince William Sound into Hinchinbrook Entrance at about 15 knots with waves 3 to 4 feet. Variable winds 10 knots off the Kenai coast, and then southeast winds to 15 knots into Lower Cook Inlet, with waves there 3-4 feet, falling off to 10 to 15 knot south-southwest winds as you go up the inlet. On Wednesday, still kind of an east-southeast winds 15 knots around Prince William Sound in the area of Hinchinbrook Entrance. 25-knot easterly winds off the Kenai, and then winds do pick up to 30 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet with swells of 8 to 9 feet. On Tuesday, variable winds will dominate right around 10 knots here around Kodiak Island in the upper half of the Alaska Peninsula before turning back toward the northeast to east at about 15 knots as you get out towards Sand Point, Cold Bay, and False Pass. But again, waves pretty minor, a foot or two on the Bering side and maybe 3 feet on the Pacific side. And then winds are going to pick up with that secondary low starting to ride up to the north and east. We expect winds to be increasing 20 to 25 knots, generally out of the east-southeast. And waves will be running about 5-6 feet along the North Pacific side of the peninsula and a few feet on the Bering side. And looking at the winds across the eastern Aleutians on Tuesday, look for east-southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. And then they shift around to the southwest, Atka through Adak, at about 25 to 30 knots. And then as you get out west of Kiska, back closer to where the low center is, you can see southwesterly gales to 35 knots with waves getting up over 20 feet there west of Kiska. And for Wednesday, winds come down, but we have that little bit of a secondary low that's formed here in the wake of it. Southwest to west winds around 20 knots throughout the eastern Aleutians on Alaska, Nikolsky. The winds turn back more around to the northwest to north 15 knots as you pull back west of Atka to Adak, and then easterly winds to 25 knots between Kiska and Shemya. Along the southwest coast, variable winds within Bristol Bay on Tuesday at 10 knots, east winds around the Pribilovs at 15 knots. Look for a northeast wind at 10 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, and then along the coastline of the lower Yukon and coming out of Norton Sound northeast to north winds 15 to 20 knots. And there could be some heavier freezing spray in open areas here just off of the Yukon Delta coastline. And for Wednesday, winds will be easterly to 30 knots within Bristol Bay with waves of 5 feet. Look for northeast to north winds out of Kuskokwim Bay to the Pribilovs at 20 to 25 knots. And then northeast to east winds, strongest winds 20 knots out of Norton Sound. But we still have a fair amount of ice in place where there are some openings and the ice waves could be 2 or 3 feet. There'll be some stronger winds through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait. Look for northeast winds of 25 knots, lower Chukchi Sea turning northerly through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island. Up along the Arctic coast, winds ahead of that cold front will be, or I should say, because the front's already going to be pushed through there, so it'll be turning west to northerly, and then a little further on out, winds go northeasterly down along the northwestern coast. And on Wednesday, we're looking at west winds 15 to 20 knots there from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, but more of a north to northeast wind, and solid northeast winds running down through the Chukchi Sea as high as 30 knots off of Cape Lisburne. And as we pass down south of the Bering Strait, we could see winds as high as 25 to 30 knots along the west side of the Seward Peninsula and the north side of St. Lawrence Island.